All right, so when you're taping your paper down, just remember that you can catch the small ledge under this mechanical arm, your horizontal edge, but you have to make sure that you're pressing it down, slide your paper under, put your hand there to hold that paper, and then you can tape the corners. And it's kind of like putting a poster down where you want to make sure everything is smoothed out. You don't want a lot of air underneath your paper. And once you get the top taped, you can smooth it to the bottom. And remember, you're going to put a border on this thing. So just a little bit on the edge is good. And that way you won't have to fix your border every time. And you'll kind of get a feel for how much you're going to have to put on the corners. So you don't have to do a lot of finish work on that border. So we have the paper down. We're going to be using our compass today. So on your compass, if you guys can see this, we'll zoom in for you. So you can kind of see my lead point there is angled towards the needle. So we want to have that sharpened. Now, if yours is broken off or it's not very sharp, you can take your sandpaper pad and just lightly, it doesn't take much, you can lightly, you want to sand the side that's opposite the needle. So you want that to be pointing towards the needle a little bit. And you don't really, I'm going to sand it over my paper, but you really don't want to sand it over your paper because those flakes can get on your paper and cause it to be, just really dirty. We want to keep our paper as clean as possible. But it does need to be sharpened and the point needs to be pointing towards the needle. And the needle and the lead should be about the same height. And you can adjust it by adjusting these wheels. This tightens it in. It's like a set screw. But when you rotate it to loosen it, it also loosens the lead and the needle. Okay. We don't want to take those all the way out because they're small parts that can get easily lost. Also, another thing that you don't want to do is wheel your compass all the way out. There's sometimes you're going to need a very large diameter, but you don't want to, if your compass is a 5-inch compass, meaning that it can only go 5 inches, then you really don't want to go the full amount because as soon as it jumps off of these threads, it's very hard to get it back on there and it's very hard to be accurate after that. So you're basically breaking it when you go too far. So just make sure that you're keeping it within its constraints. Also, when you put it back in your box, you don't want to leave it out really wide. It can get easily broken. So you want to wheel it in, about that much when you store it in your box. So yesterday we drew one that was just basically square. We want to add some circles in here, or what we would consider holes if we were actually making this. So we're going to work off of the single view one handout here. And we're going to go ahead and make the gasket here, figure 4-62. So when we start this, it's a symmetrical drawing. We don't have to do any kind of figuring to get the center point because we can use our diagonals to get the center point. So the first thing that we need to do, we're going to find the center point, and these are what we call concentric circles, meaning they share the same center. So if we're looking at the inside diameter, that smaller circle, that 3-inch diameter, that shares the same center with the others. So we're working off the same center. And we also have a bolt circle that has the same center. And then all of those smaller holes go around that center point. So when we do this, we can actually find the center by doing our diagonals. And you guys have done this in a sketch, so you kind of know what to do. Same application. You're going to put your scale out here, and you're not going to get the exact point because we can't, our scale is not long enough to go from the exact corner to the exact corner, but it is long enough for us to eyeball it and get super close. Because remember, it's not as important to get exactly in the center of our paper as it is to get the drawing exactly right. Because we're producing what we draw, not producing the center of the paper. So this is just kind of for aesthetics when you're drawing. So we're going to draw just a line, and then we'll line it up with our other corners. We end up having an X there, and X marks the spot. So that's basically the center of our paper, the approximate center, and we can work off of that center point. So the X you want to draw really light. That needs to be construction lines because we will erase it. And once we have our X, now we have to use our instruments. We're going to line our straight edge up with the center of that X. And we're going to go ahead and make center lines, okay? We know that this circle is fairly large. We have a series of circles we're going to make. So we want to just go ahead and make our center lines all the way across our paper. And the vertical lines, remember we're putting our triangle on our straight edge to keep everything flush. That way everything's at 90 degrees. And we'll make the vertical center line like so. So now we have the center of our paper and we have the center of the object. And just so we don't have to worry about these construction lines getting in our way, we can go ahead and erase that X. We could wait to the end and clean everything up at one time, but we're going to do an array of circles that's at an angle, and these angled lines may get in the way and get kind of confusing. So we'll go ahead and erase those. So what we're left with is our center line in the middle of our paper. And remember, in board drawing, we're going for accuracy. So we're going to be reading our scales and measuring with accuracy. And I'll show you how to use a compass today. It's going to be kind of difficult at first, especially if you're not used to using one. But there are techniques to help you get a little bit better on that. So we've got the center. We'll toggle back over and look at our object here. The first circle that we need to make is a 3-inch circle. So that's a diameter of 3 inch. And then the outer diameter for the outermost circle is 5 3/4. And then we have this bolt circle here. So that bolt circle we're going to make, but we're going to make it like a center line because it will work as the center line for those small holes. And that is a diameter of 4 3/8. Okay. So we'll toggle back. So with the compass, when we're creating circles, we set our compass to the radius value. So if that small circle was 3, what is the radius? The diameter is 3, the radius is half, right? So 1.5. So we're going to take our compass. Compass and our 16 scale. So find your architect scale that has the 16 on it. And we're going to put our needle point on the 0, and we're going to wheel out until our graphite is on the 1.5. And you want the tip of that graphite to be on the 1.5. Okay, so we're setting our compass to the radius, not the diameter. If we set it to the diameter, then our circle would be twice as big as what it needs to be. So once you get your compass set, the needle point is going to go exactly in the center. And watch me do this first before you try it. Watch my hands. See how I'm angling my compass? I'm angling it back. Okay, so my needle is here. I've angled my compass. I'm only holding it with my thumb and my forefinger. Okay, and I'm rotating. I'm going to rotate and twist it like this when I rotate. So you're going to lean into it. If I'm making this circle, I can start here and lean into the direction that I'm going. So the key here is not to try to hold it with two hands, but try to put pressure on just this point, twist it, and lean it into the direction that you're going. Okay, so go ahead and try it. Remember, you're just twisting it like this, but leaning is the key to you keeping it on the same spot. Now, if your compass jumps off of that spot, and it will, because your desks are kind of hard and you don't have the padding underneath like I do, so it can jump off, but just try to get it in that same little hole that is made with that needle point. If you get it in the same hole, then it's going to line up. All right, the next circle that we can make is that outer diameter circle. And if you remember, that diameter is 5 3/4. So if the diameter is 5 3/4, we need to take half of that for the radius. So, you know, half of 5 is 2 1/2, or we could call that 2 2/4, right? If we're taking half of 5, that's 2 2/4. And then half of 3/4 is 3/8. So we could actually say this was 4/8. We're trying to get the bottom number the same. Fractions are not super hard if you know that you need to get the denominators the same. So half of 5 is 2 4/8, and half of 3/4 is 3/8. So if we do that, that's 2 7/8. So if you break it down, it's not so bad. Break it down into pieces rather than trying to say 2 divided into 5 3/4. You know, you can't use traditional math methods. So I usually just break down the whole number and the fraction separately and then add them together at the end, which is a whole lot easier. You don't have to do any kind of special math. You're just doing two simple processes. Okay, so 2 7/8 is this diameter. If you remember on your scale, the eighth marks, if we're looking at our 16 scale, the eighth marks are the second smallest line. So the first mark is a 16th. The next one is 1/8, 3/16, 1/4, and so forth. But if we're looking at 7/8, we know that's almost to the whole number, but it's the eighth mark right before the next whole number. So we need 2 7/8. So we're going to wheel our compass. I'm putting my 0 or my needle point on the 0, and we're going to wheel our compass out, and it's going to be almost 3 inches. It's the eighth mark before the 3 inches. Okay. So that's how far our compass needs to be wheeled out. And if you look at just like a top view of it, it's going to be about this much. So make sure that you're looking at this thing and your needle point is on the 0, your graphite is on the 2 7/8 mark. You want to try to use that exact same hole, because remember, concentric circles share the same center. So if we use the exact same hole, number one, we're only putting one hole in our paper. That hole will probably get a little bit bigger as we go, but you don't have 3 or 4 or 5 holes in the middle of your paper. You only have one, and it's acceptable for that one. So then lean into your compass. You twist it with your thumb and your forefinger. Lean into the direction that you're going. Okay, and we want to go ahead and make these dark, thick lines. These are visible lines, or what we call object lines. When you make them with your compass, you want to go ahead and make them dark so you don't have to go back over them. And you'll notice my hole just got a little bit bigger. That's okay. In board drawing, you're going to have a hole, but you only want one hole instead of different holes. Number one, that's not very accurate because that's not exact same center. And then number two, it's not very aesthetically pleasing when you look at a drawing and you've got a bunch of holes in the middle. So we have the inside diameter of 3, the outside diameter of 5 3/4. And we said that we needed that bolt circle that was going to be drawn as a center line. That bolt circle had a diameter of 4 3/8. So if we did our math again, if we had 4 3/8, if we break that down, half of 4 is 2, half of 3/8, all we got to do is times that bottom number by 2. So it's going to be 2 3/16. Okay. So our radius there is 2 3/16. That's what we're going to set our compass to. So 3/16. The 16 marks are the very smallest on your scale because it's a 16 scale. So we're going to do 2 3/16. Again, you could put your needle on the 0 and wheel the graphite out to the 3rd mark past the 2. It's the smallest marks. That's your 16 marks. So 2 3/16. The diameter was 4 3/8. We took half of that, which is 2 3/16. And we're going to put our needle point in that same exact spot and make this circle. Now we're going to make this one just a little bit lighter because it is a center line. We don't try to put the dashes in it just yet. We'll put the dashes in. We can erase them out, but know that this middle circle is going to serve as a center line. All right, so if we go back to the drawing, we can see that the small holes that go around that center circle that we just made, we call that a bolt circle, because likely these holes are made for bolts or some other apparatus like a shaft or something that they fit over. Because this is a gasket, gaskets are normally pretty thin. You could find gaskets in all kinds of machinery where you need good compression and you don't want air or oil or some other liquid to escape. So these holes are 5/8 diameter, and we have 8 of those. So if you divide 8 into 360, you're going to end up finding this 45-degree angle. So they're equally spaced all the way around, which ends up being a 45-degree angle. So the first thing that we've got to do to create these holes is find the center point. So we're going to create these 45-degree center lines all the way around. We already have the quadrant lines. We have our center line that is at 90 degrees. So each of those points, we call that the quadrant of the circle, but we need to find the 45-degree points. So that's our next step. So when we use our instruments, we already have one that is 45 degrees, correct? We have the 45-degree triangle. So in addition to your straight edge, we'll add the triangle. and we're going to make these 45-degree lines. So the way that we do this, we make sure it's flush to the straight edge at all times, and we'll just slide this up and down the straight edge to get where we need to go. So we're going to line up our 45-degree triangle with our center point of this hole. So try to line it up exactly with the little hole that your needle point made. And then from that center, you're going to draw another center line that goes out. So remember, your center lines go just a little bit outside the part. So I'm making this line, you know, about 1/8 of an inch outside that part. And then to get the other 45-degree line, I'm just sliding my triangle over, coming from the center out. We don't have the gaps in there yet, but we can erase out for the gaps when we need to at the end. So I'm moving my straight edge up so I can do the center lines on the top. Now, had I had my straight edge up or had it been a little bit bigger, I could have done all of those at one time. I have a small triangle, so I'm just realigning it and doing it in 2 steps. So basically, I'm just moving my triangle across my straight edge, lining it up with the hole. And then I have my 45-degree lines. And again, these are center lines. They go a little bit outside of the part. And you want them to be uniform. Like my center line here is a little bit shorter than the others. So I can just add a tiny bit to it. All right. So now that we have these 45-degree angles, we can make those small circles. So if we look back real quick at our page, the circles were a 5/8 diameter, and we need a radius. So half of 5/8, we times the bottom number by 2. That gives us 5/16. And remember, the 16th mark is the smallest mark on your paper, or I mean on your scale. So we need 5/16. These are going to be the smallest circles we've made so far. We're going to bring our compass in, and you'll find that the smaller the circle, the harder it is to make with the compass. So 5/16. We could actually just count 5 little lines over to get that 5/16 mark. Okay, so it's going to be very small amount of space between our needle and our graphite. But we do have the center points for all these circles now. We have the location dimensions. Just as a reminder, 2 things we need to know about holes. We need to know where they are, which is this location dimension, which is where our center lines intersect with that center circle. And then we need to know how big they are. So the 5/16 radius tells us how big they are. So we're going to put our needle point in each one of these intersections and try to make those small circles. Now remember, the smaller the circle, the harder it is to make. So just do your best. This is really good practice. You know, sometimes beginners actually try to hold the compass with 2 hands, and it does not work out very well. You do want to, if your lead has kind of died down and doesn't have as sharp of a point, you might want to sharpen that a little bit with your sandpaper pad. And sometimes it's going to flip out of that circle like mine just did. If it does that, just get it right back in that same circle, and you can use your eraser shield later to erase the, the little pieces that you might have accidentally drawn on your sheet. So, you don't have to stop what you're doing. You can go back and erase that. So my circles are starting, my line width here is starting to get a little bit thicker. I want to be consistent. So that tells me it is time to sharpen my instrument. Okay, and don't sharpen it over your paper. So especially on these small ones, if you lean into the direction you're going, it's going to be a whole lot easier to make them. This is your first drawing with the circles, and you can see, mine's jumping out. So if you don't have a lot of practice, yours is probably going to jump out too. Just try to use that same exact hole. You'll find in board drawing, your eraser is your best friend. So if you mess up, that's okay. You can erase it and fix it. And I have a few spots where it jumped out, like here and here, that I would need to use the eraser shield to clean that up. So if I'm taking my eraser shield, I'm putting it over what I want to keep and just trying to find a little corner somewhere that only has that spot where I want to erase. So, and then I'll stick my eraser in there, and it protects what I want to keep, erases what I don't. And sometimes, you might have to go back over a circle with your compass, but you want to try to make them as uniform as possible while you're making them the first time. These are the one line that when you're doing a board drawing, these are the ones that you want to go ahead and just make dark and thick as you're going. So really for the object, we are pretty much done with any kind of functionality of the part. We just need to clean up our drawing. We're not going to put dimensions on this one on the board drawing. Eventually you will start doing dimensions in AutoCAD, but for us, we're just learning techniques. We're learning how to use our scales. And you will have a greater appreciation for AutoCAD once you get in there, if you've had to do it on the board. So after you get the small circles, we do need to put some gaps in here for our center lines. The gaps, this larger gap right here that we have for the main center, we need to straighten that up a little bit. We also need to have gaps in the angled lines that we made with our triangle. So our center lines in the middle here should have gaps between the main center point and where the lines extend out.
I can't make
it. Also, we need to have smaller gaps, and this might be where your eraser shield comes in handy. You can put it next to your center mark here. You want to have smaller gaps right here at the small circles. So we still need to have like the small plus sign in the middle to show the actual center. And then the rest of the center line is just a long dash. So your center line should have a short dash, a gap, and then a long dash. And that's what we need to do all the way around this center circle or this bolt circle and those lines that we made at 45 degrees. So we could take some time and clean that up, get the gaps in our center lines. We want to make sure, especially on board drawings, that you try to have uniform thickness. In AutoCAD, we can set our line thickness so it's not as hard. But like I said, if you are board drawing and then you transition into AutoCAD, you do have a greater appreciation, and you also have a greater understanding because you know what the system is doing behind the scenes. We also want to, ease down these center lines. Mine are not as uniform as they need to be. So I want all my center lines to go outside the object about the same amount. And that should be about 1/8 of an inch. That's the ANSI standard. This one is not quite long enough, so I'm going to put my straight edge back up there. You really don't need to make any lines without a straight edge. So I'll put my straight edge back up there. I have a nice, fairly neat drawing, and I can continue cleaning this up a bit or, making my lines the same thickness. Some things that you can kind of catch here in the camera that you can see this line looks a little thicker than this line. I really should have my center lines about this thickness. So that might be just a little bit too dark for a center line. Those are the kinds of things that you can look for when you're cleaning up your drawing. So you can go back and finish cleaning up your drawing. Even if you haven't made all the circles, that's fine. We'll go ahead and proceed with our border. Now you've done borders before. We did one on the board drawing yesterday. You've done them on the sketches. The thing you need to remember with the borders, it is the darkest, thickest line. If you're using the 16 scale, you're going to go in 1/4 of an inch all the way around your paper. So remember, that's basically just putting your 0 on the very edge of the paper, going over 1/4 of an inch. You can make a little mark. You're going to do this all the way around. So if you're not at this point, that's fine. You can proceed with me, or you can, stay cleaning up your drawing and doing what you're doing if you feel comfortable with your border. If you do not feel comfortable making your border, go ahead and proceed with me. So the first step is getting the actual border line. And this is the darkest, thickest line. We can go ahead and make it very dark and very thick. So with our straight edge, we are coming to our 1/4 inch mark that we just measured and drawing that dark, thick border line. So what that would look like, I measured over 1/4 of an inch. Here's my dots. And then down here, I measured 1/4 of an inch, and I went ahead and made this with my horizontal edge. Okay. And remember, your vertical edge, you want to use your instruments. And I want to make sure that I have it on my straight edge, and I want to make sure there's plenty of room. I don't want just, if you can see over here on the left, I don't want just a little bit of it on my straight edge. I want to try to get as much as possible on my straight edge so it stays firm as I'm drawing. So I need to keep it flush and up against my vertical of my horizontal straight edge. Okay. And my triangle's not quite long enough, so I do have to move my straight edge to get all of this. So to do the border, I went in 1/4 inch all the way around. My paper is 8.5 by 11. So you're basically making your border a 1/2 inch smaller all the way around. So between the border lines, if this is 11 inch, between the border lines, it's actually 10.5 because we put a 1/4 inch space on either side. We're going in 1/4 inch all the way around. To get our border, and then for the title block, I'll put up the measurements. But the distance between the border line and the edge of the paper, 1/4 inch. And that follows the ANSI standard. We're using the ANSI A Form 3 template. And if we look at the rest of it, we're going to do a 2-level title block here. The first line, we already have the border line down here at the bottom. The next line up from the border line is 3/8 of an inch. And then the next line up from there, this top of the title block, is another 3/8 of an inch. So we'll go 3/8 up and then 3/8 up. Our letter height was 1/8 of an inch. So that should give us about 1/8 of an inch space at the top of the letter and the bottom of the letters. And it should be centered as much as possible horizontally in the box that it's in and vertically. So we will do those horizontal guidelines to keep the letter height at 1/8 of an inch. But as we're putting on these lines, we'll just go over and measure for the vertical lines and go up and measure for these horizontal lines. But it's 3/8 of an inch from the bottom of the border to this first line, another 3/8 to the next line. And the 3/8 is important because that's going to follow the lines for your lettering guide. So if you're off on your measurements, your lettering guidelines are not going to work correctly. So make sure you get 3/8 of an inch for this title block. Then we went over 2 1/4 and 4 1/4. So I'm going to leave this up for just a little bit so we can get our vertical lines. And that 4.87 is 4 7/8 in fractional form. So in the end, our boxes will look like this. Now we're ready to do our lettering. And I know we used the lettering guide yesterday, but just to reiterate, we're going to use these on the side, these holes on the side. They are already 1/8 of an inch apart. And we will stick our lead in one of the holes, but before we decide which hole, we're going to line 2 of the holes up with our border that we created. So down here in the title block, 2 of these lines should line up in the holes. So if I choose this hole to line up with my line, then there should be 2 holes in the middle, and then that third hole should line up with my top line, because remember we made that 3/8 of an inch. So I should have 2 holes right in the middle, and then the outer 2 holes should line up with my border and my title block. This should be flush up against my straight edge, so make sure it is. And like we said before, you're going to have to feel like you need 3 or 4 hands to do this, but you'll get good at it. You'll apply pressure with your pencil to hold it down to the straight edge, but you'll just go across, and you really only want to put the lettering guidelines where you're going to letter something. And these should be super duper light. I'm making mine a little bit darker so you can see it on the screen. But these should be super light, so you don't even really have to erase them. And if you jump off, like mine jumped off because I came to the end of my straight edge, you just want to make sure that you get back lined up before you start making your guidelines again. And the same thing at that top title block, you should already have 2 of them lined up, and you'll just choose the 2 holes in the middle. So sometimes this happens. Mine just jumped right off the edge. That's why I said give yourself plenty of room on this edge, because if not, your instruments will not stay straight. So I'm going to get lined back up. So in the first box on here, it's blank, but we'll put on Swafford Career Center. Remember, all caps. In board drawing, we're using vertical uppercase Gothic. We're not slanting at all. We're making it 1/8 of an inch, all caps. The approximate distance between your words is your pinky finger. Unless you're a guy and you have really big pinky fingers, you might want to do a little less than that. And this figure number, let me look real quick. It was 4-62, and the title was Gasket. And remember, you can just shorten figure with FIG. It's very common to use abbreviations in mechanical drawing. All right, so I'm going to leave my drawing up here a little bit more. You guys are still working on getting yours cleaned up and getting those circles the way they need to be. But it's pretty much done. Whenever it looks like this, you're good to go. You know, circles are hard, especially the small circles with a compass. But you can use a template, which we'll use next time. I'll show you how to use a template and get better circles when you need something smaller. Now the compass, you'll still need to use a compass for the larger circles. And so you will need to have practice with both.